It's been a great pleasure to be here far away and to see all of you and to listen to this really quite compelling seminar. It's a seminar of which Ezra would be proud. And I want to say, and I'm going to speak mostly about Ezra in concluding this session. We have lost in Ezra a friend, and for us at Harvard, a leader. And our thoughts continue to go out to Charlotte, to Steve, and all of Ezra's extended family. But I think the work of this seminar shows that the work of Ezra goes on. We've had a compelling keynote from the senior minister, and incredibly stimulating comments from our panelists. And so let me just close by sharing on behalf of some of my colleagues here at Harvard and my own personal thoughts about Ezra, who was Clay's teacher, as we've heard, our colleague, our collective friend. So this is a little bit of a, you can call it a 我所知道的傅高义, the Ezra Vogel that I recall. You know, I think people outside of universities can't understand the degree to which Ezra Vogel was a force of academic nature. This guy was busy always. He was productive always. He was active in scholarship, of course, but also in public affairs and in teaching. He took care of his students. He built an enormous academic program in East Asian studies at Harvard for our undergraduates. He was an optimist in his work and in his life, and he was absolutely driven to make a difference. You know, the Ezra Vogel that I knew was already a very famous guy when I joined the Harvard faculty in 1992. And he had made his mark, as we know, in the study of Japanese society, then by studying Canton under communism without going to Canton, from the near abroad of Hong Kong. Then he wrote this blockbuster of Japan is Number One, before turning back for the rest of his career, mostly to study contemporary China, its leaders, and the relationship between China and its neighbors. And if you know the world of scholarship, you know over generations it gets more and more specialized. And the Harvard, Clay mentioned this, Clay took a course that was all of East Asia, Japan, China, Korea, over 2 semesters, the famous rice paddies course, which we still teach in different ways today. But you know, scholarship then divided mostly into national categories. And Ezra was one of the very few anywhere who could work seriously as a scholar on either side of the Sea of Japan and be taken absolutely seriously as an expert in Japanese as well as Chinese, as well as broadly Asian affairs. And this is one of the reasons why this led us, actually, I was one of the lead actors at the time, to try to recruit Ezra to be the first director of our Asia Center. I was then the chair of what was called our Council of East Asian Studies, which was a body as decisive as an 18th century Polish parliament. We had irretrievable camps divided into nation states. There's absolutely no reason, after all, why the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans should get along any better at Harvard than they do in Asia. They didn't, by and large. And we had a huge divide between historical and cultural studies on the one side and modern social science on the other. But we needed to look at Asia across its borders. But success in doing this and creating out of this council a new Asia Center depended on getting the right person to run it as the founding director. And Ezra was that person. His tenure began with the Asian financial crisis of 1997. He partnered with Victor Fung in Hong Kong to gather friends and former students, many now in government positions in Asia, to set in motion Asia Vision 21. And the Asia financial crisis of 1997 came and went, but Asia Vision 21 continued because the issues that were raised by that crisis and the issues of an integrating Asia remained absolutely compelling. Still, when you think about it, his center of gravity is academically was in Northeast Asia, in China and in Japan. He grew up as an academic like everybody else of his generation in East Asian studies, in the very long shadow of John King Fairbank. And he often told me that it was no fun being the first post-Fairbank director of what we now call the Fairbank Center. After all, Fairbank was still in the office every day. Ezra learned and emulated, maybe improved even, on John Fairbank's best practices, meeting and hosting students and scholars informally at his home, just within minutes of his office. And like Fairbank, who had lived in China during World War II as an ally of China in Chongqing, and then would be treated as an enemy by China after 1949, Ezra, who served in the US Army during the Korean War, was consumed by the relationship between the United States and China. In the late 1990s, or in the 1990s generally, as a decade, in the aftermath of Tiananmen, and in the seemingly shattered hopes of a politically changed China, Ezra aimed to restore a degree of normalcy to Chinese-American relations. So he pushed very hard here at Harvard against all kinds of opposition and criticism to invite President Jiang Zemin to Harvard in 1997. And he filled our ancient Sanders Theater with faculty and students and security details with very big guns, while protesters raged all outside. He made sure that the Q&A for President Chang, which included discussion of Tiananmen, was an open one. This was an extraordinary, I should tell you, from the Fairbank Center, it actually bankrupted the Fairbank Center just to pay for the security, but the operation was an academic triumph for Ezra, but also for Harvard. In a return visit that Ezra helped to arrange the following spring, our president, Harvard president, Neil Rudenstein, became the first Harvard president to set foot in mainland China. He spoke brilliantly at the 100th anniversary of Beida, of Peking University, on the values of liberal education. We then met with President Jiang in a return visit in Zhongnanhai, actually in Mao Zedong's old study and bedroom, where the chairman had lived and worked and died. It was now Jiang's reception room. And as you may recall, President Jiang loved to play the piano. He didn't play the piano for us, actually, but he did let us know his current favorite song, which was the movie theme of the film Titanic. Ezra believed that if people could just talk to each other, actually listen to each other, or read each other's works and actually think and learn, that understanding even the most difficult issues was possible. That's why he brought President Jiang to Harvard. That's why he devoted the next decade of his life to writing a biography of Deng Xiaoping, who oversaw both China's economic reform and its renewed political repression. That's why he arranged in later years a series of Chinese-Japanese dialogues on facing history, assuming that a history that was honestly faced might well lead to reconciliation. You know, in some ways, that was the toughest assignment of all. Very few countries, including this one, are successful, really successful in facing their history. Ezra's was also a belief in the unique mission of scholars and universities. For example, Harvard, Hong Kong University, University of Hong Kong, National University of Singapore, University of Tokyo, Beida, Tsinghua, and other great universities, to do things together, especially perhaps at times when their governments might be in tension. He had a sense of Harvard as a private institution, to be sure, but with an enduring sense of public mission. And one legacy of this, which we still have very strongly today, is now whatever is happening between the American and the Chinese governments, we at Harvard are committed to deepening our engagement with China and not to retreat from it. After all, the United States and China have been cultural partners in education for more than a century. The United States and China cut off cultural and educational ties in the 1950s to our mutual regret. We cannot make that mistake again. And in his final years, as you all can imagine, this concern with the deterioration of Chinese-American relations became Ezra's overriding passion. He convened conferences and workshops of notables from both countries who were part of the international elite of policy types. He organized public letters and memoranda. He spoke at all kinds of panels, both in person and during pandemic on Zoom. A difficult task as China moved left under President Xi Jinping and as the United States lurched rightward and maybe even off the edge under President Trump. But in this period, Ezra Vogel remained a man who believed in his soul that people were fundamentally good and that they could come to understand one another. And he wasn't brought to despair by this moment, but to a new sense of mission. And it was in this act of convening, just as we have convened today, just as James and Victor have convened us today, convening at times friends and foes for Ezra, scholars and practitioners, students and alumni, Chinese and Japanese, presidents of countries and presidents of universities, even humanists and social scientists. This is where Ezra was in his greatest element. He was an original scholar, a great and dedicated teacher for his students, a breathless mobilizer, but above all, he was a convener of talent. He had a belief in Rensai, in human talent, and a belief that talented and good-spirited people could somehow figure everything out. And certainly we at Harvard aim to carry on that vision, and we look forward to working closely with our friends and colleagues in Asia in doing so. As difficult as things sometimes seem today, I feel absolutely confident that Ezra would still be optimistic about the future for the United States and for China and for their mutual relations, perhaps especially now with the prospective appointment of our colleague, Ambassador Nicholas Burns, to Beijing, but more broadly still optimistic about the capacity of human beings to solve problems together. I want to thank James and Victor for convening us, Clay for orchestrating such a wonderful panel, and let me thank you all for watching us and turn things back to the current Fung director of the Harvard University Asia Center, James Robson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kirby, for those wonderful closing remarks. It actually is very difficult to end this evening, this dialogue that we had. I personally wanted to keep going for much longer. So, but on behalf of Dr. Fung, I would like to express a special word of thanks to Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam for his keynote address, which took us to Southeast Asia and focusing primarily on Singapore, and also to all of our panelists, Professor Rithmer, Professor Ghosh, Professor Fan, and to Chairman Tanaka-san, for sharing their expansive knowledge and assessments of the current state of affairs in Asia today. And also to Clay Chandler for driving the dialogue so substantively and moving seamlessly across economic and political concerns from China and Japan to India, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And a special thanks to Professor Bill Kirby for his closing reflections and personal thoughts on Ezra, which I found extremely moving personally. I should also say that for those interested in Ezra's life and legacy and spirit, the Harvard Asia Center Publications Program will be publishing a book very soon entitled Remembering Ezra Vogel that's going to include 150 brief personal essays about Ezra. And I know many people here this evening or morning have contributed to that volume. So please keep a lookout for that. And a special word of thanks again to the Harvard Asia Center and Asia Global Institute at University of Hong Kong staff for helping to arrange this event. And most especially, I'd like to thank the audience for signing in from all over the world. Again, as I said, I wish this dialogue for the inaugural Vogel Asia Dialogue series could go on more. I learned a tremendous amount. I was riveted by all of the talks and discussions that we've had. But I'm happy to say on an optimistic note that this is just the first in a series of events. So please keep a lookout for future events that will take place in this series. The issues and problems that we've talked about this evening are not going to go away anytime soon. And so this type of dialogue is more important than ever, precisely the types of dialogues that Edra was concerned of convening. So thank you again for joining us for this engaging discussion, and hope to see you at our next event. Thank you very much.